Early morning in the Sinai Peninsula begins not with birdsong, but with the sounds of the airport. The metallic echo of trolleys, the hum of air conditioners, the rolling of suitcases on tiles. The air has not yet warmed up to the heat of the day, but it is already dense and heavy. It smells of fuel, dust, and the sea, which is very close. Silhouettes of palm trees and airplanes in the parking lot appear through the pre-dawn haze. The sun is rising over the mountains, where the sky is gradually brightening from pink to gold. Sharm el-Sheikh Airport has its own rhythm. Everything is calibrated to the second here, just like in a clock mechanism. Those on duty on the platform give short commands on the radio. Movers smoothly unload suitcases from containers. The catering company rolls trolleys with plastic packages, buns, drinks, children's menus. In the distance, a tractor starts its engine, tiny against the background of giant airplanes. Everything is going according to the usual pattern, repeated hundreds of times. Passengers gather at the check-in desk. Someone else is wearing beach shorts, someone is already in warm clothes. At home, in St. Petersburg, they promise sub-zero temperatures. In the queue, someone is joking, someone is yawning. The atmosphere is calm, almost lazy. Vacationers return home overloaded with souvenirs, impressions, and sun fatigue. The Kogalymavia family is at the counter number 29. Young parents, Tatiana and Alexei, hold their 10-month-old daughter Darina in their arms. A little girl with huge eyes, not yet realizing that there is an airport around. There is a toy bunny and a bottle of water in the stroller next to it. Tatiana takes pictures of her husband and daughter, writes a short caption, "It's time to go home." The photo is light, lively, like thousands of others. But later it will become a symbol of the entire flight, a symbol of how suddenly life can end. Irina and Alexander Semenov are in the waiting room. They celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary in Egypt. They laugh, remembering a trip to Cairo, arguing about who forgot the sun cream. There are dozens of photos on their phone that haven't been posted online yet. Their plans include dinner at home with their parents, children's voices, and the familiar sounds of the kitchen. At this point, everything seems as stable as life itself. A little further away sits the family of the Shanes. Mom Olga takes a photo against the background of the portholes and signs it, "We're going home." Simple words spoken hundreds of times a day by different people. But it is this photo that will soon become the last reminder of them. Behind the glass, outside the terminal, in the parking lot number 41, work is in full swing. There, under the dim light of floodlights, engineers are preparing for the departure of the Airbus A321 with the registration number EIETJ. This aircraft was built in 1997. It is almost 18 years old, but it is serviceable, well-maintained, with regular maintenance. The metal case casts shades of copper under the first rays of the sun. Engineers check the skin, sensors, landing gear struts, and hydraulic fluid level. Technicians are bustling around downstairs. Someone is checking the tire pressure. Someone is connecting the fuel hose. There are dozens of light bulbs on the consoles, each of which should be lit in its own color. Everything is fine. Meanwhile, the crew is undergoing a pre-flight briefing. Commander Valery Nemov is 48 years old. He has flown more than 12,000 hours, almost 4,000 of them on an Airbus A321. Co-pilot Sergei Trukachev is 45 years old, more than 5,600 hours, 1,300 of them on this type. They speak calmly, briefly, without unnecessary words. For them, it's not just a job. It's a familiar ritual, honed over the years of flying. There is order in the cabin, route maps, checklists, steering wheels, instruments. Everything is checked. The scoreboard shows Flight 9268, heading from Sharm el-Sheikh to St. Petersburg. The landing was announced at 5:20 a.m. local time. The hum of voices is getting louder. People are packing up. Children are yawning. Someone is laughing at souvenirs. Someone sends the last message, "We are boarding." School on the platform. A flight attendant is on duty at the ramp, smiling and helping with baby strollers. There is a hissing sound of air conditioners, a slight smell of ozone in the air. The metal steps are cool underfoot. People get on the plane, find their seats, put their bags in the luggage compartments. Someone is looking out the window, Someone is putting on headphones. A soft light is flickering in the cabin. Speakerphone. Standard greeting. Welcome aboard Flight 9268. Travel time is 4 hours and 20 minutes. People are smiling. Someone is applauding, a familiar gesture on Russian charter flights. Outside, the silence is broken by a powerful hum as the IAE V2533 A5 engines start up. Their sound is steady, confident, like a heart that is about to start working at full capacity. The crew reports readiness to the dispatcher. The plane starts moving. Concrete creaks under the wheels, reflecting the heat of the morning sun. From the cockpit, you can see how a strip of the horizon is shrouded in orange light. The runway is slowly melting away behind the pilots. Through the portholes, passengers can see how Sharm el-Sheikh is shrinking, disappearing into the hot haze. The camera seems to be slowly moving back. The Airbus A321, bright white with a blue tail, turns on course. There are 217 passengers and 7 crew members on board. A regular charter, a regular flight, a regular morning. Everything is calm. It is at such moments that life seems predictable. When music is playing in the headphones and the plane is moving smoothly towards the beginning of the lane. When no one knows that there is already a point ahead where this flight will end. The lane ahead is as flat as the horizon. The air on it is trembling from the heat. A test dialogue sounds softly in the cockpit, dry, short phrases. Speed 100, 150, V1, rotate. The steering wheel tilts smoothly towards itself. The plane, like a giant bird, lifts off the ground. The vibration of the floor subsides. The change of sensations is a sharp push down and lightness. The wings catch the first currents of the morning wind. In the cabin, the usual reaction of passengers is, someone involuntarily squeezes the armrests, someone smiles, looking out the window. A sandy plane flashes under the wings. Then the sea. The sun reflects off the water and dazzlingly hits the windows. The A321 begins a smooth climb, careens to the left, heading northwest towards St. Petersburg. The IAE V2533 A5 engines are humming in unison, producing thrust of almost 14.5 tons each. All parameters are in the green zone. Oil temperature, pressure, fuel consumption are ideal. The commander and co-pilot check the readings. The speed is stabilizing, the landing gear is retracted, and the autopilot is on. The scoreboard lights up. FL 310, 31,000 feet. At the 7th minute of the flight, the crew enters the echelon set. Overboard, about 9,000 meters, the air temperature is -30, visibility is excellent. The radio exchange with the Cairo dispatcher goes smoothly. Everything is normal, everything is calm. But there are years of history behind this calmness. This aircraft, the Airbus A321-231, first took to the skies back in May 1997. His life was long and eventful. At first, he flew under the flag of the Lebanese airline Middle East Airlines, then served with Saudi Arabian Airlines and even briefly with the Syrian Chamwings. Over the years of operation, tens of thousands of flight hours, hundreds of thousands of passengers transported. He has seen both the sandstorms of the Middle East and the rains of Northern Europe. In 2012, the car returned to Europe and received a new home at the Russian airline Kogalymavia, operating under the Metrojet brand. Since then, this aircraft has been a regular participant in charter flights from Russia to Egypt, Turkey, and Bulgaria. Experienced, proven, familiar to pilots and technicians down to the smallest detail. Everything is going according to the scenario of thousands of similar flights on board. Passengers take off their shoes, unfold their chairs, and open their tablets. Someone is photographing clouds. Someone writes a message. We have gained altitude. Everything is fine. The flight attendants begin to prepare the cabin for the distribution of drinks. Dishes are clinking softly in the kitchen compartment. Commander Namov speaks briefly with the co-pilot. Everything is stable. The voice has the confidence of a man accustomed to trusting technology and not doubting the sky. He managed to survive dozens of unplanned situations during his career, and each of them ended successfully. And today, everything seems the same. Outside, there is a bright blue sky, without a single cloud. The sun reflects off the wings, creating glare on the fuselage. Inside, the steady sound of engines, measured, lulling. It feels like a flight in which it is impossible to expect anything unusual. But even in the most stable systems, there are millions of little things where fate can hide between two sensor values, between two checks, between 2 seconds. At such moments, technology and man become a single organism, alive but vulnerable. At the 23rd minute of the flight, the dispatcher receives the last signal. Everything looks familiar. A moment later, silence falls on the air. On the dispatcher screens, the aircraft's traffic lines intersect, blink, disappear, and reappear. This is a familiar pattern, the rhythm of the sky. But at 7:17 a.m. local time, one of the signals just freezes. The label of Flight 9268 goes out. No warning, no alarm codes, no mayday. It was as if someone had pressed pause in the lives of 200 people. The dispatcher calls the crew several times. Kogalymavia 9268. Please respond. Kogalymavia 9268. Radio control. Silence. Attempts go through the backup channel, but nothing either. 1 more minute, 5 more. Pilots from other planes connect to the communication, try to catch the answer, no sound. Radar operators are changing their minds. The room becomes noticeably quieter. The last coordinate on the screen is north of the Sinai Peninsula, about 300 kilometers northeast of Cairo. The altitude is 9,400 meters. The speed is 750 kilometers per hour. After that, there's a cliff. No decline, no reversal, just disappearing. At such moments, time seems to stretch. Communication channels are being checked at the Cairo Mission Control Center. Perhaps a transponder failure? Frequency overload? Everything happens. But minutes pass, then dozens of minutes, and not a single new signal. Meanwhile, the sun is rising over Egypt. Passengers on other planes see endless blue skies, calm and clear. None of them knows that somewhere below them, one of the largest search operations in the history of the region is already beginning. In St. Petersburg, at Pulkovo Airport, life goes on as usual. The usual message appears on the board opposite Flight 9268, en route. Relatives and greeters are drawn to the cafe. Someone is buying flowers. No one suspects that the plane that was supposed to fly over Sinai is no longer showing signs of life. After half an hour, the scoreboard changes to delayed. This is not yet alarming. Flights are constantly delayed. But an hour later, there is intense movement in the terminal. Airport staff are talking. Security is strengthening the cordons. There are vague announcements over the speakerphone. Relatives notice that the passengers' phones have stopped responding. The messages are not being delivered. Maybe a connection? They say to themselves. But it's getting clearer by the minute that something went wrong. The first short notes appear in the news feeds. There is no connection with the flight from Sharm el-Sheikh. First, a few lines, then updates, comments, and rumors. Some people write about problems, others about landing in Turkey. Hundreds of people update their phones every second, hoping to see one word, found. But not a single communication channel comes to life. There's nothing on the radar. There is absolute silence in the air. In the south of Sinai, the Egyptian military lifts helicopters. The sun is already high. The sand is blinding. From the helicopter, you can see an endless plateau, interrupted by rocks and sparse roads. And somewhere out there, in the midst of this silence, there must be a point where the flight ended. When the first group of rescuers goes to the place of the alleged fall, they see only clouds of dust. The closer you get, the clearer it becomes that this is not an illusion. The wreckage, metal, scattered fragments for kilometers. Meanwhile, machinery is starting to work on the desert, while people in St. Petersburg continue to stand at the scoreboard. Some still believe that the sign arrived will appear. Others are no longer watching. They just don't say anything. The Sinai Desert is not just sand. It's a different world. Silent, endless, motionless. It burns during the day, freezes at night. And in this absolute silence, even the wind sounds like someone else's voice. The sun rose too quickly that day, and its light fell on what could no longer be called an airplane. The first rescuers got here a few hours after the loss of communication. The helicopter hovers over the area, the pilot looks down, and the words get stuck. Below them is not a crater, not a drop line, but hundreds of dots. A field scattered with metal. The wings, tail, and interior fragments are all scattered over an area of more than 20 square kilometers. It doesn't look like an ordinary crash. The sand absorbs everything. Even the sound of footsteps disappears when the rescuers' boots sink into the dust. People walk carefully, taking coordinates, photographing each find. Representatives of the Army and Egyptian rescue services are on site, and Russian specialists will join later. Everyone has the same question in their eyes. What happened? The commander of the search group notes that the fuselage has been torn into dozens of pieces, and the tail section has been thrown far away from the main area. This can mean one thing: the destruction occurred in the air. The plane did not fall completely, it collapsed at altitude. The heat of the desert makes the air fluctuate, as if the earth itself does not want to show the truth. The metal is charred, the plastic is melted, and the cockpit is almost completely destroyed. There is silence inside the dashboard. The very screens where the green numbers had been glowing recently are now covered in soot. The serial numbers of the parts are visible on some fragments. Specialists methodically record them in order to later put together what remains of the Airbus A321 with the registration number EIETJ. Fragments of seats, fragments of paneling with the Metrojet logo, and personal belongings of passengers are found among the wreckage. Cameras, phones, books, soft toys. All this lies under the sun, like a frozen moment. Black boxes are also found, the flight voice recorder and flight parameters recorder. One of them is slightly burned, but the body is intact. It is quickly sent to Cairo for decryption. The whole picture of what happened will depend on this. Fire crews are continuing to work on the site, not because of the fire, but to cool the metal structures, which heat up to 100 degrees in the sun. Doctors are examining the area, recording everything. The psychologists who arrived with the group just stand aside. Their work will begin later in St. Petersburg. From the air, the picture of the disaster is even scarier. An Egyptian army drone shoots a panorama. Dark spots on the background of golden sand, like burn marks on the body of the earth. The distance between the large fragments is hundreds of meters. This means that the destruction occurred at high altitude, at high speed. Experts immediately rule out versions. There are no signs of fire in flight, and there are no signs of a collision with another aircraft. There are no signs of an attempted landing in the cabin. Everything points to instant destruction. Meanwhile, messages are beginning to arrive through international channels. Russia declares an emergency. Specialists from the Interstate Aviation Committee and the Ministry of Emergency Situations are being sent to Egypt. The first plane with Russian rescuers departs on the same day. Identification equipment, criminologists, and crash experts are on board. The Egyptian military is setting up a perimeter on the ground. Locals living nearby say there was a loud bang in the sky, like an explosion, followed by a trail of fire. No one saw the plane descending, only crumbling into pieces. By evening, the sand is already hiding some of the debris. The wind brings new waves of dust, and rescuers are working in respirators. Each found object is carefully marked, photographed, and handed over to the center. For some it's just a job, but for others it's a memory. Things that will then be laid out on tables in St. Petersburg, where they will be identified by their relatives. At night, the temperature drops sharply to +5. People are sitting by the floodlights, writing down everything they have found. The silence of the desert is jarring. Only the occasional radio sound, conversations, commands, coordinates. Meanwhile, an emergency meeting begins in Cairo. The Egyptian authorities are creating a commission, which includes representatives of Airbus, IAC, Rosaviation, and EGCAA, the Egyptian aviation regulator. The first words that sound at the table: it is necessary to understand why the destruction occurred in the air. The first images appear in the news around the world. The presenters read the headlines, trying to keep their voice steady. The Russian plane disappeared from radar over Sinai. Wreckage found, everyone on board. and the sentence ends. In waiting rooms all over Russia, people stop talking. The phones are ringing idly. The first spontaneous memorial appears on the streets of St. Petersburg. Flowers, candles, toys. People bring photos of their loved ones and place them at the glass doors of the airport. The wind blows the candles away, but someone lights them again. Searches are continuing at the crash site. The morning brings new discoveries. Among the sand, they find elements of the interior cladding, torn fragments of floors, and fragments of onboard seats. Everything indicates that the impact on the ground was not a single one. The plane literally crumbled in the air. Russian experts confirm that the destruction began instantly, with no signs of a crew struggle. The black boxes record the last seconds, smooth parameters, then an instantaneous stop of recording. No shouting, no commands. It means that everything happened suddenly. A headquarters is being formed in Moscow. The Russian president gives orders to provide assistance to the families, send an additional group of investigators, and ensure the transportation of the bodies. In Egypt, they are beginning to prepare a place for a temporary morgue. Meanwhile, in the desert, the machinery continues to work. Every detail matters. Experts know that they will have to assemble an accurate diagram out of this chaos, like a puzzle of thousands of fragments, where every scratch can explain the cause of the tragedy. By the evening of the third day, the crash site looks like a field camp. Generators are humming, and the researchers' tents are lined up. The sun is setting over the horizon again, turning everything reddish. In this color, the metal of the plane seems alive, as if reflecting the warmth of those who seek the truth. But no answers have been found yet, just questions. How could a plane that was in good working order, tested, and crewed by an experienced crew disappear on a flat route in clear weather? Why is there not a single alarm on the recorder recording? These questions hang in the air, as does the silence that remained after Flight 9268. It was late autumn in St. Petersburg, with gray skies, drizzle, and the first frosts on the sidewalks. People at Pulkovo Airport were standing with flowers and balloons in the morning. Someone was holding nameplates. Someone was filming a waiting video, a familiar meeting scene. But now these same people were sitting on the floor of the terminal, holding their phones to their ears. They were silent, or wept, or they just stared at nothing. The word delayed still appeared on the board opposite Flight 9268, but everyone already understood that it would not arrive. Families stood by the window, who did not leave until the last moment, as if hoping that a miracle would appear. A message, a call, at least the sound of footsteps from the arrival area. But there was absolute silence in the hall, which was not even broken by the announcer's announcements. During these hours, St. Petersburg turned into a waiting city. The televisions in the houses showed the same thing: the Sinai Desert, helicopter footage, close-ups of airplane fragments. People recognized the wreckage by the details of the paintwork, by the color of the chairs. Many simply turned off the screen, unable to watch. The Gromov family. Hundreds of comments have appeared on Tatiana's social media page. Under the very photo where she holds Darina in her arms, they wrote, "Please come back. We are praying for you. Let this be a mistake." But in the evening, the passenger list was confirmed. The whole family was on board. The photo of little Darina, who has not yet learned to speak, has become a symbol of the flight. Her eyes stared straight into the camera, a look that saw only the beginning of life. Irina and Alexander Semenov. Their friends believed to the last that maybe they were not allowed on the flight, maybe they changed their tickets. But the lists did not deceive. Later, their son will write online, "Most of all, I want my parents to be alive, to hear their voices again." You never think that a simple trip can be the last one. There are 220 for such stories. Each is a world that ended instantly. Someone was waiting for her husband. Someone, a daughter returning from vacation. Some of them are grandchildren who went to the sea for the first time. In every house where this flight was waiting, there was an unsaid phrase. The phones kept ringing. The answering machine said, "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." People listened to these words over and over again, as if it could make a difference. Candles began to appear on the streets of St. Petersburg, at the entrance to the airport. First a few, then hundreds. People came without invitations. Someone put down a toy. Someone left a note. We remember. Flowers covered the asphalt. Among them are children's drawings. The sun, the plane, the sky, the signatures of a child's hand. Fly calmly. On that day, the city became a single entity. Bells were ringing in churches, and there was a silence in the subway that had never happened before. On the streets, passers-by turned at the sound of airplanes, as if every takeoff now reminded them of a single one. The relatives of the victims were gathered in a separate airport lounge. Doctors, psychologists, airline representatives. No one knew what to say. People were just sitting next to each other, hugging each other. Someone was quietly repeating, "This can't be happening." Someone didn't speak at all. A day later, we received confirmation. There were no survivors. With these words, a new reality began. Now I had to fly to Egypt to identify myself, to wait, just to be near what was left. The Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations was already stationed at Sharm el-Sheikh airport. Zinc containers with bodies were loaded into the first of them, carefully, with the precision of a ritual. The people who worked at the site will later say, "The sand was hot there, but the atmosphere was icy. No one spoke loudly. Even the wind seemed to be quieter." In St. Petersburg, the airport was closed to receive the first special flight. When the plane of the Ministry of Emergency Situations landed, rescuers, doctors, and priests lined up on the runway. The sun was already setting, and the spotlight fell on the gray containers being unloaded from the side. The silence was such that raindrops could be heard falling. This silence will later become a part of the city. She will be remembered by those who stood at the fence then, seeing only the silhouettes of people in uniform. They did not know which of the containers was carrying their loved ones. They only knew that everything was there. Memory pages began to appear on the internet. People shared photos, wrote stories, and talked about those who were on board. "We went to school together. She dreamed of becoming a flight attendant. He just bought a ticket to Egypt, flew abroad for the first time in his life." Every story has a phrase that now sounds like an echo. "I can't believe it." In the evening of the same day, the whole country froze. Television, radio, and social media were all talking about the same thing. Even those who didn't know anyone personally felt like they had lost someone of their own. Because this flight has become common, not only for those who were on the plane, but also for those who were waiting for it. Memorials have appeared at cultural centers, squares, and metro stations. People brought photographs, put up lamps, and read poetry. No one asked, no one organized. It's just that the whole country suddenly felt the silence synchronously. The next day, at the request of parents, a minute of silence was held in schools. The children were standing in the corridors. Someone was holding a paper airplane in their hands. No one said why, they just understood. At that moment, the tragedy ceased to be news. She became a part of the memory, part of the country, and no one asked what happened anymore. Everyone asked, why? In the first days after the tragedy, the whole world looked at Egypt. Maps, diagrams, everything that could be passed off as an explanation flooded the airwaves. Journalists lined up for official comments, but there were no real answers. Only phrases, "The investigation is ongoing. All versions are being considered." Behind these words, there was a diplomatic calm, which was already bubbling under the surface. Moscow demanded clarity. Cairo responded cautiously. Russian specialists who arrived at the site immediately recorded the nature of the destruction. The hull flew apart in the air. The tail section was thrown far away. It doesn't look like an engine failure or structural failure. Too sharp, too full. On November 3, 2015, the first emergency meeting was held in Moscow with the participation of the IAC, the Federal Air Transport Agency, the FSB, and representatives of Airbus. In the closed part, a phrase was heard that changed the tone of the investigation. Traces of explosives have been found on the fragments of the aircraft. But in Egypt, these words were perceived as a challenge. Officials said, "So far, there is no evidence of an explosion. All versions remain open." Egypt's political caution was explained simply. Recognition of the terrorist attack would hit the tourism industry. and therefore the country's economy. The flow of Russian tourists accounts for almost a third of all foreign visitors to Egypt. Millions of dollars, thousands of jobs. To admit that an internal security leak had been triggered at Sharm el-Sheikh airport meant losing the trust of the entire world. Therefore, Cairo delayed the confession. The Russian media, on the contrary, were already beginning to speak bluntly. The images of the desert were replaced by analytics. The headlines sounded louder and louder. Traces of explosives? A device went off on board. The experts showed diagrams of the luggage compartments, explained where the explosive device could be located. According to the special services, the destruction began in the rear part. It was there that the oversized luggage compartment was located, where baby strollers and sports equipment are loaded. The version looked logical. If the bomb was planted there, then the instantaneous destruction of the fuselage was fully explained. Russian specialists have requested full access to Sharm el-Sheikh airport. The Egyptian side partially agreed. The investigators examined the baggage area, the security service, and talked with the staff. And it was there, according to the evidence, that the unofficial version was first heard. An internal trace is possible. Someone from the staff could have had access to the luggage and used this access to plant an explosive device. In parallel, a subtle diplomatic game began. Officially, friendly relations, mutual sympathy, and a joint commission. Unofficially, it's mutual distrust. Cairo understood that if Moscow publicly called the disaster a terrorist attack, Egypt would lose face. At this time, the first leaks begin to be published in the Russian press. The journalists cite sources in the investigative structures. With a 90% probability, an improvised explosive device with a capacity of up to 1 kilogram in TNT equivalent went off on board. These figures are quoted by world agencies. Egypt is silent. On November 7th, Russia officially suspends all flights to Egypt. The decision is unprecedented. Tourists staying in the country return on separate flights. Russian airlines are ordered not to carry out charter programs. In Cairo, this is perceived as political pressure. The positions of the countries differ. Russia is increasingly leaning towards the terrorist attack version. Egypt continues to deny it. The French side, representatives of Airbus, are also cautious. They talk about possible external influences, but without specifics. Meanwhile, information is being exchanged on the sidelines of the security services. Russian investigators are transmitting data on the analysis of microparticles found on fragments of the skin. Indeed, traces of explosives were found in them, RDX and TNT. These substances could not have got on board by accident. A week after the disaster, the Sinai branch of a terrorist organization linked to the so-called Islamic State claimed responsibility for the explosion. A statement and a photo of an aluminum can with wires and a battery appear on their channel. Later, investigators will confirm that the device could indeed have been assembled in this form. Compact, capable of destroying an airplane when installed in the luggage compartment. But Egypt gives official recognition only after a few years. Then, when the political and economic blow could no longer be avoided. At that time, there was a cold tension between the countries. Frozen tourist flows, limited contacts, cautious diplomatic formulations. It didn't matter to the families of the victims. They just wanted to know the truth. Not slogans, not versions, but a specific answer. Why did their loved ones board a serviceable plane and not return? When Russia officially declared the disaster a terrorist attack, for many it was both a shock and a relief, because the only thing worse than the unknown is false hope. But there were specific people behind this confession. Egyptian investigators have arrested several employees of Sharm el-Sheikh airport, including a technician who worked in the baggage service area. According to the investigation, one of them may have collaborated with extremists. In fact, this meant that the tragedy did not begin in the sky, but on Earth. In the parking lot number 41, where a couple of hours before departure, people were photographed against the background of the plane, where it seemed everything was calm. This truth is hard. It does not provide relief, because it shows that the boundary between safety and disaster is not kilometers or thousands of meters, but an instant, one careless check, one person who had access to places he shouldn't have. And when the official statements subsided, when the newspapers stopped writing, there was only silence. The one that began in the sky of Sinai and now lies between the two countries. When the experts opened the recorder cases, there was silence in the room. Not out of respect, but out of concentration. These two metal blocks, weighing just over 3 kilograms each, contained the last seconds of Flight 9268's life. There were no emotions, no words, just data, milliseconds, lines that suddenly break off. The first to decode was the FDR Flight Data Recorder, a flight parameter recorder. It records everything: the aircraft's position, altitude, angle of attack, speed, engine condition, hydraulic pressure, turbine RPM, and oil temperature. 1 second before the end of recording, all parameters are perfect. The temperature is stable, the pressure is normal, the speed is 750 kilometers per hour, the altitude is 9,400 meters. The autopilot is on. There are no signs of malfunction, overloads, deviations. Then zero. The recording just stops. Not a decline, not an emergency trend, not a chaos of numbers. The instantaneous disappearance of all channels is as if someone pulled the plug out of the socket. For engineers, this means only one thing: catastrophic destruction of the hull, instantaneous power outage of all systems. This is not possible with normal technical failures. Even if the engine fails, the parameters continue to be recorded. Even in case of fire or loss of hydraulic systems, the recording does not stop. To cut off all the channels at the same time, you need one thing: instant destruction, a shock wave, a rupture of the structure in the air. The second recorder, the CVR, cockpit voice recorder, captures the sounds in the cockpit. His data was listened to more than once. First the Egyptians, then the French, then the Russian specialists. Every hiss, every click, every microsecond noise was analyzed. The last 20 minutes of recording is a normal flight. The voices of the two pilots are calm, measured, as always. Discussion of the route, weather conditions, short phrases on the checklist. At some point, a faint laugh sounds in the cabin. Someone is commenting on something insignificant. The steady hum of the engines, no alarms. And then a second. One sharp, powerful, dull sound. Not like a mechanical shock or turbulence. Experts call this an acoustic surge of high pressure. 0.8 seconds after that, silence. Full. The recording simply stops. Those milliseconds were the key to the whole investigation. On the charts, they looked like a vertical line, a pressure peak, an instantaneous power outage. Neither pull-up nor mayday. The crew didn't even have a chance to realize what had happened. Airbus engineers, having studied the fragments of the hull, confirmed that the point of origin of the destruction was located in the rear of the fuselage, in the area of the luggage compartment. The metal is bent outward, a typical sign of an internal explosion. The pressure from inside tore through the skin, throwing the tail dozens of meters away, and the nose lost control and flew apart at altitude. In the laboratory where the data was decrypted, everything was recorded down to tenths of a second. Experts noted that the nature of the destruction left no doubt. This is not depressurization, metal fatigue, or structural failure. It was a shock wave, a sudden pressure surge, not typical of any operational situation. And yet, the dry numbers on the charts do not convey what happened, because there were people behind every parameter. 224 passengers, 7 crew members. Behind these lines on the screen are voices, breathing, laughter, vacation photos, and a flight that lasted only 23 minutes. When the commission officially announced that the nature of the destruction of the fuselage corresponds to the effects of an internal explosion, the world already knew the answer. But the knowledge did not bring relief, because even in the laboratory, among the instruments and the cold light of the monitors, the air seemed thick, as if the recording itself carried a trace of that second. After the publication of the report by Airbus and the French Bureau BEA, the data was confirmed. There are radial microcracks on the hull, traces of high temperature exposure on the floor elements, and traces of explosive compounds on the inner surface of the fuselage. The Russian side had no doubts. The head of the FSB publicly stated, "An improvised explosive device went off on board Flight 9268. This is a terrorist attack." But at that moment, the figures and reports stopped being just facts. They became proof of the vulnerability of the system that was supposed to protect. The recorders were silenced forever. But it was their silence that became louder than all the statements, because they showed that everything was perfect. Until the last second. Plane crash investigations are always looking for coincidences, repetitions, patterns, and system failures. But Flight 9268 was different. Nothing matched here. Neither the equipment, nor the crew's mistakes, nor the weather conditions. Everything was perfect until one moment. So the answer lay not in the sky, but on the ground. The first suspicions appeared during the analysis of the wreckage. On one of the fragments of the inner lining, experts found microparticles, traces of RDX and trinitrotoluene. These substances are not used either in aircraft maintenance or in baggage areas. There was only one way they could get there, through the human factor. The question became obvious. How did the explosives end up on board a passenger flight that passed the standard pre-flight inspection? The answer began to be sought at the Sharm el-Sheikh airport. This airport was considered safe. Modern scanners, multiple control lines, frequent checks. But upon careful inspection, the commission noticed that the usual chaos was hiding behind the facade of the system. Cameras do not cover all areas. Metal detector frames work unevenly, and some employees use bypass corridors. Routine work where attention is dulled by habit. Investigators have reviewed hundreds of hours of surveillance camera footage. They show the usual life of the airport. Trolleys with luggage, cleaners, technicians, catering staff. Among the dozens of people, several people were identified who had access to the plane at the parking lot number 41 on the day of departure. One of them is a maintenance worker, a local resident who was loading luggage. His name was not mentioned in the official reports, but it was he who, according to the investigation, could have received a small device disguised as a harmless object. The version says that he put it in an oversized luggage compartment among baby strollers and suitcases, where the inspection was superficial. The homemade bomb, according to Russian experts, weighed about 1 kilogram in TNT equivalent. It was made of a plastic case with a simple timer and a time-activated fuse. All that was needed was to carry it unnoticed. The explosion occurred 23 minutes after takeoff, when the plane reached cruising altitude. The pressure in the cabin was stable, and the hull structure was under maximum load. At this point, even a small charge creates the effect of a magnified shock wave. Tears the skin, destroys the power elements, breaks the cable lines. Then the process becomes irreversible. International intelligence agencies have confirmed that this version explains the instantaneous destruction, the radius of the debris spread, and the nature of the damage. No other scenario corresponded to the data from the recorders and metal analysis. A few weeks later, a terrorist organization unit operating in the Sinai Peninsula claimed responsibility for the attack. There was a short phrase in their statement: "We shot down a Russian plane in response to the strikes on Syria." At first, this statement was perceived as an attempt at propaganda. There were dozens of such statements in those years. But soon a photo appeared on one of the extremist forums. A tin can with wires and a battery. The device looked primitive, like a school experiment. But the experts admitted that the scheme is working, and the power is the same as what the devices recorded. Came as a shock to many. How could you destroy a complex machine assembled from hundreds of thousands of parts, certified to the highest standards, using a device that can be assembled from household components? But that's exactly what makes terrorism dangerous. It exploits the weaknesses not of technology, but of people. The investigation revealed that dozens of temporary employees worked at the airport. The contracts are short-term, the checks are superficial. Some had relatives in extremist-controlled areas. Someone could have been recruited through social media, someone out of duty, fear, or beliefs. These people are not sitting in the cockpit. They don't wear a pilot's uniform. But they may be the last link that turns an ordinary flight into a tragedy. When the Russian experts submitted the final report, there was no response from Egypt. In Cairo, they chose to remain silent. A confession would mean that there was a terrorist cell operating in the heart of the country's tourist center that had access to the airport. But the facts were obvious. Photographs of the skin, chemical analysis, and the nature of the destruction all pointed to an internal explosion. Specific traces were found at the bomb site: microparticles of plastic, aluminum, and copper, typical of improvised devices. The arrests followed. Several airport employees were detained, interrogated, and some were accused of complicity. The Egyptian authorities did everything possible to keep the details out of the press. But the leaks happened anyway. According to one version, the bookmark did not occur on the day of departure, but the evening before, when the plane was being cleaned after the previous flight. Then access to the board was less controlled, and the inspection was formal. The device could have been in the luggage compartment all night, activated by a timer after takeoff. It explained everything: the suddenness, the lack of a radio signal, the instant destruction. Even the disconnection after a split second coincided with the charge power. From a technical point of view, the version looked flawless. From a human perspective, it's unbearable, because she said that the tragedy did not happen because of a mistake, not because of a breakdown, not because of an accident. It was planned in advance, and it is executed coldly, prudently, without emotion. The event, which claimed the lives of 224 people, took less than 1 second. And it all started with someone pressing a button, or maybe just plugging in a battery. After the official recognition, Russia has strengthened security controls on all flights. Additional screening, duplicate baggage checks, and video monitoring of employees have been introduced at airports. They said at the briefings, "Now this is impossible." But those who saw the crash site knew that there are no systems that can give a 100% guarantee, because everything that makes the sky safe is based on trust. And if one person decides to betray him, everything collapses. The phrase uttered by one of the investigators became the unofficial outcome of the investigation. It wasn't the enemy who brought the bomb on board. It was brought by someone who was trusted to get past the frame. When the first wave of news subsided, a stage came that usually remains behind the scenes. Cold, bureaucratic, and tedious is the stage of investigations, reports, judicial inquiries, and international commissions. Emotions go away, but something begins that is perhaps more difficult than the catastrophe itself: the struggle for recognition and justice. The Interstate Aviation Committee has formed an investigative group together with Egypt and France, the country where the Airbus A321 was produced. Formally, this is an international cooperation. In fact, it is a field of political compromises. Each participant in the investigation had his own interest: Cairo to save face, Paris to prevent accusations against the manufacturer, Moscow to achieve official recognition of the terrorist attack. In the first weeks, the parties exchanged reports, transcripts, and technical opinions. The Egyptian Commission submitted an interim report. The causes of the disaster could not be determined. Russia responded by sending its materials with evidence of the explosion. The French took a neutral position. External influence is likely, but behind the dry language, there was a quiet struggle for the truth, the one that each side saw in its own way. Russian experts insisted that traces of explosives on the aircraft's skin could not have appeared by accident. The photographs from the laboratory showed typical radial type microcracks, such as those formed only by an internal explosion. The Egyptians asked for additional confirmation. They referred to possible contamination from the instruments. The conversation turned into a game of terms. At the same time, investigators in Russia opened a criminal case under the article on the terrorist attack. Dozens of witnesses were interrogated, chemical examinations were carried out, and all the aircraft parts brought from Egypt were collected. At the Airbus plants in France, specialists analyzed metal for fatigue, eliminating the possibility of hidden design defects. The result was the same: the hull collapsed from the inside. Meanwhile, the families of the victims began their struggle. They demanded answers not in press releases, but in legal documents. Who is responsible? The airline? The airport? The state? The lawyers explained, it all depends on the wording. If the disaster is recognized as a terrorist attack, the responsibility lies not on the airline, but on the state in whose territory the incident occurred. If it is an aviation accident, then insurance and compensation under contracts are used. And these words, terrorist attack and aviation accident, have become the subject of an almost diplomatic war. For Egypt, Recognizing the terrorist attack meant not only a reputational blow, but also billions in losses. After all, insurance companies that worked with the Egyptian aviation infrastructure could file lawsuits for huge sums. As a result, Cairo was stalling. A year, then two. Egypt's official final report did not name the disaster as a terrorist attack. The wording sounded neutral. The reasons for the destruction of the aircraft remain unknown. But in Russia, everything was clear. In 2016, the FSB officially announced that an improvised explosive device had been planted on board Flight 9268. This statement has become a legal reference point. All cases related to compensation began to be considered based on this version. Insurance companies paid the basic amounts, about 2 million rubles per passenger, stipulated by law. But the families demanded more: moral damages, responsibility of the services, and a review of safety standards. They joined together, creating the Association 9268 to represent the interests of the victims. Their meetings were held in St. Petersburg, at long tables with piles of papers, where each name is not just a line in the report, but a whole story. Many relatives traveled to Egypt for identification procedures. For them, everything that was happening resembled another world. The heat, the military cordons, the endless checks. In this alien chaos, they tried to find at least something, a photograph, a thing, proof. One of the fathers recalled, "I just wanted my son to be returned to me, and they gave me certificates and case numbers." Meanwhile, international courts were considering dozens of lawsuits. Some families have appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, demanding recognition of the negligence of the Egyptian authorities. Others have filed lawsuits against insurance companies linked to Airbus. But lawsuits in aviation take years. The issue of guilt is being resolved between jurisdictions, languages, and legal norms. For those who have lost loved ones, time passes differently. They do not count years, but anniversaries. In 2018, the Egyptian prosecutor's office quietly closed an internal investigation. Russia continued its course. Egypt has not officially recognized the attack, but has not denied it either. He just stopped talking. This silence was the final touch of the diplomatic conflict. Meanwhile, in Russia, the case of the terrorist attack continued to live on. The FSB has identified possible militant organizers linked to the Sinai wing of the banned organization. Several people have been put on the international wanted list. But the specific perpetrators, those who carried the device, who handed it over, who ordered it, disappeared into the sands of Sinai. No one was convicted, but the families continued to attend meetings, listen to reports, and read the wording. Circumstances are being clarified, documents attached. Sometimes it seemed to them that the investigation existed by itself, like a machine that moves by inertia, without seeing those for whom it began. One of the mothers of the victims later said, "When I read these reports, I realized that no one is writing about my son. They write about devices, about metal, about circuits. But he was human. He was laughing. He had dreams. Why is there no mention of this anywhere?" This is the paradox of any disaster. It always begins with human error or malicious intent, but ends with paperwork. Between these 2 points is everything that is called the word truth. For lawyers, this is a clause in the contract. For engineers, it's a line in the report. For relatives, it's a life that no longer exists. But even when it seemed that all the doors were closed, one thing remained unchanged: the memory. It does not require visas, signatures, or stamps. She just exists. And sometimes it becomes the only court that passes a real verdict. After Sinai, aviation was no longer the same. The world, accustomed to flight safety as a matter of course, suddenly saw a weak spot in a system where every check must be error-free. The tragedy of Flight 9268 has become more than just news. It has become a frontier. In the first weeks after the disaster, airports around the world switched to enhanced security measures. Russia temporarily suspended all flights to Egypt, and later revised security protocols on international routes. Aviation security services began checking not only passengers, but also those who usually remain in the shadows: technical staff, cleaners, movers, catering workers. Everyone who gets access to the plane for even a minute is now checked as strictly as the pilot. airports have introduced multi-level controls, one screening for passengers, the second for staff, and the third for everything that gets on board. Cameras began to record not only the registration areas, but also the routes of movement of workers. Their work cards now have an accurate link to the time and place of entry. Flight 9268 has become a precedent. International organizations, including ICAO and EASA, have reviewed airport security standards. The concept of insider threat appeared. Internal threat has hardly been talked about before. Now it has become an official risk category, when the source of danger is not outside the perimeter, but inside it. Russian airports have introduced the practice of random staff checks without warning. In some destinations, double baggage screening has been introduced, one before check-in, the second before loading. Even catering trolleys are now being monitored as potential threat carriers. New OFSEC standards, aviation security, have been introduced internationally. Now, each airline is required to have its own plan to prevent acts of unlawful interference. And if these documents used to be in the archives, now they are really being worked out with situation modeling, training, exercises. Technical services have also changed their approach. After the Sinai disaster, aviation colleges began to study not only aircraft schematics, but also the psychology of personnel behavior, recruitment methods, and signs of abnormal employee behavior. Because the threat may manifest itself not in the dashboard, but in the person standing next to the luggage cart. These measures were not a formality. They were born against a background of real pain. Every decision was made remembering Flight 9268. Because there, over Sinai, not only 224 lives were cut short, but trust in heaven was cut off there. In Egypt, airports have undergone a total reconstruction. New X-ray scanners, metal detectors, and biometric terminals have been installed in Sharm el-Sheikh. All employees were recertified. Many were fired. The Egyptian authorities knew that if trust was not restored, tourism, the backbone of the economy, would collapse. Russia, in turn, imposed a ban on charters to Egypt, which lasted almost 2 years. It was possible to return there only after checking each airport by Russian specialists. It was only in 2018 that flights were partially resumed, and then under constant control. This disaster has become a global lesson. Even those countries where this seemed impossible began to rethink vulnerabilities. The United States, Great Britain, and Germany have increased access control to aircraft, especially baggage compartments. Many airports have introduced an additional secure loading procedure that records who exactly loads luggage, at what time, and from which shift. After Flight 9268, the phrase was often heard in the aviation environment. "We have lost the illusion of absolute security." These words were uttered by one of the Airbus engineers. He said them at a conference in Toulouse, looking at a slide with a photo of scattered debris in the desert. And there was the same silence in the hall as back in Egypt. But out of this silence has grown a new generation of rules, a new safety culture, a new philosophy of aviation, where every little thing, from checking the trolley to signing the magazine, is perceived as an act of trust between man and the sky. Today, when planes depart from Sharm el-Sheikh again, their screening takes longer than before. The scanning systems even check the air in the luggage compartments. Each service stores an archive of video recordings recording every minute of pre-flight preparation. And even if it slows down the process, it doesn't annoy anyone, because there is a memory behind it. The memory of those who did not return. The memory of those who showed how fragile even an ideal system can be. After Flight 9268, aviation began to repeat one simple phrase more often. Safety is not technology. It's an attitude. And perhaps this is the only way to make the sky reliable again. Time can smooth out pain, but not erase it. And every year, as October 31st approaches, the air in St. Petersburg becomes different. The city seems to remember, without words, without announcements. People just know that on this day, the sky over Sinai is getting closer again. The first memorial appeared at the glass doors of Pulkovo Airport. Then, in 2015, no one planned to create it. People just started coming. First, relatives, then passers-by, then those who did not know anyone personally, but felt that they should be there. Candles, children's toys, and photographs of smiling faces were lined up on the tiles in front of the entrance. Photos of those who flew home. Later, the city erected an official monument. There are grieving cranes on the square near the airport. 31 metal cranes soaring into the sky, each a symbol of the soul, each a reflection of the October date when the flight ended. These cranes don't scream about the tragedy. They rise up quietly, as if showing the way, from the earth to the light. There was silence at the opening ceremony, as there was then, 10 years ago. Among those present are relatives, pilots, rescuers. Someone whispered, "Thank you for remembering." The governor spoke official words, but the main thing was heard behind them. This is not just a monument. It's a promise. Don't forget, people gather here every year. They bring flowers, white balloons, and children's drawings. Someone is reading poetry. Someone is just silent. The names of all 224 people are on the marble slabs. And if you follow the engraving with your finger, you feel that there is a whole life behind each name. Family, plans, laughter. A random phrase said before departure. Some people come here at night when there are no TV cameras or official speeches. They just stand there, listening to the hum of planes that take off and disappear into the clouds. These sounds are both pain and comfort at the same time, because the sky that took them away has now become the place where they will stay forever. Memorials appeared in other cities as well, in Moscow, Ekaterinburg, Volgograd, Kogalym, where some of the crew came from. Commemorative plaques were installed in the schools where the dead children studied. Some of them have their drawings. The sun, the sea, the plane. Everything that once seemed like simple happiness. Television coverage of the anniversary is not like regular reports. There are no big words, only shots. Candles, photographs, wind, rustle of cloaks. The reporters are almost whispering, as if they realize that a loud voice is inappropriate here. The families of the victims continue to communicate with each other. They have their own community now, their own silence. They call each other simply ours. It may not be noticeable to outsiders, but these people are forever connected by the fact that they have experienced the same thing. Someone has opened a children's aid fund. Someone is helping the rescue services. Someone is just coming to the memorial site to light a candle for everyone. Some of the relatives say, "We don't want it to be about pain. Let it be about love, about the life they left behind." Every year on the anniversary day, the date is projected on the airport building. October 31st, 2015. No sounds, no music, just numbers disappearing into the evening sky. And at these moments, the city freezes. Petersburg doesn't make noise, it doesn't shout, it just remembers. Trams continue to run along the routes. People return from work, planes land and take off. But there is something special about this ordinariness. An invisible thread between heaven and earth. Every candle on the memorial is not just a sign of sorrow. This is the point of light from which the new memory card is formed. A map that, years later, you can use to find your way back. Not to people who are no longer there, but to understand why it is important not to forget. And while these candles are burning, Flight 9268 does not disappear from the sky. He's just flying at a different altitude now, to a place where there's no turbulence, no fear, no pain. Where the eternal flight continues in silence that speaks louder than any words. Years have passed. But once you hear the date, October 31st, 2015, that sky comes back to mind. Serene, blue, smooth, as if time itself was not in a hurry then. And everyone who has ever heard of Flight 9268 no longer perceives the word Sinai in the same way as before. What remains after such events? Reports, figures, dates, yes, but they are the main thing. Understanding how fragile the human system is, even when it seems perfect. The Airbus A321 is the epitome of engineering. Millions of parts, thousands of hours of testing, dozens of protection systems. And all of this can disappear in a split second because of a single device weighing less than a kilogram. Because of one person who was trusted to go through the frame. That's the whole point of aviation, and perhaps of civilization itself. We fly because of trust. Trust between the pilot and the dispatcher. Between the passenger and the car. Between the country and the sky. And every time the plane takes off, this delicate balance is checked anew. After Sinai, there were fewer illusions and more honesty in aviation. The systems have become tougher, the inspections have become longer, and the instructions have become stricter. But the main change was not in the techniques and regulations. It happened in people. Now everyone who works with an airplane understands that its action is not just a part of the procedure. This is a part of the life of those who sit in a chair by the window. The tragedy of Flight 9268 was a reminder that security is not a wall, but a fabric. And if even one small hole appears in it, everything goes through it. This fabric is woven from thousands of hands, looks, decisions, from the way we treat our work, our loved ones, and our responsibilities. When the engineers were dismantling the wreckage, one of them said, "It's not just metal. This is the memory of the people who entrusted the sky to us." And these words may be the whole point. The Sinai tragedy is not just a story of loss. This is a story about how humanity learns to cherish what it creates anew, about how pain can become the foundation for future security, that every check, every X-ray, every pause before takeoff is not a formality, but a promise. Promise that it won't be like this anymore. And yet the question remains, how could this have been prevented? How could you see what was hidden between shifts, between routine and inattention? There is no response, because he's not alone. Because it's not just about those who check the luggage, but about all of us, about how often we trust without thinking. But maybe that's the point. The sky is not a place without mistakes. This is a place where a person learns to be responsible, where every tragedy makes the system stronger, but the heart is softer. There is always a fire burning at the airport memorial in St. Petersburg. The wind from the bay extinguishes the flame, but it is rekindled. And that's the whole truth. We cannot return those who left on October 31st, but we can keep their light on, because the sky, even after the darkness, is always the sky. And memory is what makes it bright.